Hi, I'm Antonia. This is Universally Me. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Antonia Carlotta, and check out my Patreon where I post behind the scenes videos plus pictures and memorabilia from my family's private collection. Last month, I made a video about how Universal was responding to the coronavirus, what was happening in the parks and on the backlot, what was going to happen to the movies and theaters, and what benefits were available to employees. In response, I had some questions from you guys wondering how Universal was affected and how it responded to the 1918 flu pandemic. And in a lot of ways, Universal's response aligned with other studios, which we'll talk about. But there was one very specific and very devastating way that Universal was impacted more than anyone else. And that's what I'll talk about today. 102 years ago, the world was a very different place. The film industry was still fairly new. Hollywood barely existed. Universal was only about 6 years old and had only been in California for about 3 years. World War I was coming to an end and the film industry was really set to boom. But then the flu hit. The first cases may have come as soldiers came home around the spring of 1918. This wasn't the first time people had encountered the flu, but this was the first time that it predominantly hit younger and healthier adults. The way we handled the flu was wildly inconsistent from city to city and state to state. It took a while for Hollywood to even take it seriously. They kind of thought that it was more of an East Coast problem at first. Men in particular seemed to be especially averse to wearing masks or gloves. They thought that it was going to make them weak or less manly. The first LA quarantines happened in September, and in mid-October, the LA City Health Commissioner ordered schools, churches, and movie theaters to shut down. On some days, LA was seeing as many as 1,000 new cases in a day. Smaller studios were worried about how they could survive if their productions were shut down completely. A few of them banded together to plead with the city of Los Angeles to still let them film. Because they shot largely outside, they felt that their industry was safer than most. But Universal followed a different tactic. They were one of the studios that started following a 4-week vacation plan. In the 4-week vacation plan, anyone who wasn't already working on a production would get 4 weeks vacation without pay. At the end of the 4 weeks, anyone who was on vacation would start working, and anyone who was working would start their 4 weeks vacation. The idea was really just to stagger work and productions and try to stop the spread that way. Many actors and crew members did in fact catch the flu, but generally speaking, they tried to downplay their symptoms because they would rather keep working if they had the opportunity. A lot of the most famous people who caught the flu survived, but we also don't know the full extent of all the amazing people we might have missed out on because maybe they died before they had a chance to make it big. In January of 1919, Mary Pickford caught the flu, though she recovered, but just 1 week later, a supremely important member of the Universal family was not so lucky. Carl Laemmle's very own wife, Reka. Reka was in New York at the time, and it all happened so fast. Within a couple days of the onset, it developed into pneumonia, and she died. Reka was only 43 years old, and she'd largely stayed out of the spotlight, so it makes it so hard to find pictures or stories of her now. She was the only love of Carl's life. He never dated or married again, and I've heard that he wore a white carnation in his lapel buttonhole in her memory. From what I've heard, she loved being a wife and a mother. She was an amazing mom to Roosevelt and Jr., who were only 17 and 11 when she passed. It's hard to piece together the next few months of Carl's life after Reka's death. In some ways, it seems like he threw himself into his work. He was still releasing movies and showing up to events. In March, he moved into a new apartment in Hollywood with Roosevelt and Jr. There was one other major change in the industry that was a result of the flu. Small theaters across the country had trouble surviving the pandemic, so studio owners went in and bought them up for pennies on the dollar with the intention of playing only their own movies. Carl didn't go right to buying theaters. He started by making deals with the theaters to play exclusively Universal films. But by the 1920s, he started acquiring chains and at one point had more than 1,000 theaters. This is such an interesting outcome of the flu. Not something I would have expected, but it is something that people have their eye on again now, as it looks like studios might be looking to acquire theaters again. I learned a lot about the 1918 flu pandemic making this video, and to be honest, it was a little disconcerting at times. There are so many ways that I see history repeating itself, from the inconsistent restrictions city to city, the resistance to social distancing, and the rush to open things back up. Thinking that the numbers were going down, people started going out too early in 1918, and it led to a second wave that was so much worse than the first. It's what killed my Aunt Reka. I can't stress enough how important it is to stay home as much as you can and prioritize your health and the health of people around you. This isn't about freedom, this isn't about politics. This is just about getting to the other side of this with as few casualties as possible. And right now, the only way to do that is to slow the spread of infection. And, the sooner that we get through this, the sooner we can get back to Universal. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Antonia Carlotta, and check out my Patreon for bonus content. Thank you. Bye.